which is good.
Okay.
It's now 10:31. I'll start admitting all
Okay.
and bring people in and ask them to join. Hang on, let me just go to the lobby. Admit all. There we go. Here we are. Good morning, Ian.
Morning.
Good morning, David. Good morning, Jim. Good morning, Podrick. Good morning, Phil. Morning, Jim. Morning, Fiona. Morning, Chris. Morning, Richard.
Is Henry on a train?
No, that's just his office backdrop. Of course, he's on a train.
I want
that. Yeah, he is the traveller. He is the traveller. So there we are. Yeah, Henry's on a train. If you've just joined, please, if you could mute, that would be great, just to cut out any background noise. That would be brilliant, please. Thank you very much. Obviously, give David the chance to speak very shortly. Welcome, Mark. Welcome, Sarah. And a few more people joining. So let's do that. Okay, so before we start, we are recording. So can we have a thumbs up from everybody that we're recording? Alan, Richard, Moshin, yep. Brilliant. Okay, that's fine. We are recording. Okay, which is good. John, I'm going to mute you if that's all right. Just to there we go. That's fine. Okay. Now 10:32. Okay, good. Okay, let's start. So obviously, David, you're going to share some slides, copious amount of slides. So let's hope that works. But good morning, everybody. Welcome to this week's Pension Playpen Coffee Morning. Delighted that David Brooks from Broadstone's here to talk about anti-scamming and the world of how administrators and trustees can deal with anti-scamming legislation, what the regulator's doing about it, what can we as industry gurus do about it to protect members. So it's a really, really important presentation, which I'm really looking forward to. As usual, if you'd like to make a comment in the chat, please do. But we do encourage people to raise a hand and get involved. So if you want to make a comment to David, then please raise a hand and we'll bring you in and we'll monitor that. So without any further ado, I will pass on to David, and you can introduce yourself, David, and pray that this slideshow works.
I've been praying all morning. Yeah, so morning, everybody. My name is David Brooks. I'm head of policy at Broadstone. My background is administration and consulting and being a techie person in pensions. So that's my journey, 20 odd years looking after defined benefit schemes. And yes, and so I'm going to talk to you about scams. And I know a lot of you will know a lot about scams already, but I am going to take us through a little bit of a history lesson so we know what we're talking about, make sure everyone's on the same page. But as Steve says, yeah, willing to take questions at any point on anything at any time, so don't hold back if you've want to make a comment or a question, or you want me to repeat something if I've said it too fast. So hopefully you can see slides. If somebody wants to stick a thumb up, they can see the slides. Great, thank you, Alexander. Brilliant. So is it a quick agenda? So Bill's on the phone. So we've got so a brief history of scams. I'm going to talk you through some of the scams and how they've developed over time. And some of that is really just to help inform what the regulators and the government have done to try to address scams. So it does sort of contextualize what the law is now and why it is the way it is. And then we'll go through those legal changes over the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years or so. And then we focus on what trustees and administrators can do. So some top tips and how the due diligence works and how it actually works in practice. And I think really the crux of it, actually where it'll get interesting, and I'll anticipate more comment here, is the issues and concerns. You know, how's it going? What are we getting right? What are we getting wrong? What are the big things that are coming up in the future that will cause some problems? And you are going to get copies of the slides. I'm not going to go through probably the whole deck, but I've got some slides at the end with some links to further reading, SCA documentation, TPR stuff, all that stuff that is out there to try to help you learn or understand and fight scams is all there on these slides as well. So when you get copies of these slides or get access to them, you can click on those links to your heart's desire. So a brief history of scams. I mean, it's nothing new. I mean, scams have been around for years. It picked up a lot sort of in the 90s, late 90s, we had a thing It was called trust busting in those days, or pensions liberation. And the way they worked in those days was basically the scammers would set up a fake occupational pension scheme and entice people to join that scheme and transfer in. And for the honour of transferring in, they would be stung with a massive upfront fee of 20 to 30% just to go into this fantastic arrangement that they've been missold. And then the scam would kick in by the scammers would then make a loan to the individuals of equal to the value of their pensions. That was the liberation side of things. They've effectively released the value of those pension funds via a loan, which the individuals have to pay back over time to the scammer. And then that's when it all kicked in. Really, the bad stuff kicked in from that point onwards, because not only would the loan be an unauthorized payment and there'll be tax charges linked to that, the assets were gradually being stripped out the back door by the scammer. And the member will have spent everything, all the money's gone out of the pension and they've lost. And in addition, they'll have a tax charge from HMRC as well on top of around 40% of the value of their fund. So that was the way they kind of worked. And we had lots of stuff around pension liberation in the 90s. The scammers didn't particularly like this model because they needed to outlay lots of money in that initial loan. So scams developed a little bit more, and they started using SASs, so small self-administered schemes, where the victim is the only trustee of that arrangement. And this arrangement would be set away from any bona fide provider. So not a bona fide SaaS provider, just be the scammer doing it. And it'll be the classic sales technique of using high promises of high returns, but with high charges, often unregulated investments. And these are more like sort of downright fraud, because just the scammer would become elusive. The charges will be just depleting their funds over time, and then the funds are effectively stolen. The one day the member just wakes up one day and realizes that all their pensions are gone. So this can be quite a slow burn. The problem was as well, there wasn't much anyone could do about this because it was a registered pension scheme. I mean, one of the big problems for this one was around 2006, when HMRC changed the way they registered pension schemes. So in the old days, they used to spend a lot of time looking at trust documentation and making sure as a proper pension scheme. From 2006, it just became a form you would fill in online, and it would just be, yeah, you're now a registered pension scheme. So they got that badge of looking like a proper pension scheme. And so that was the main scam as it was during the 2000s and 2010s. Now, we'll go on to why those scams are dying out a little bit later on, because that's what the new regulations are addressing. But scams have become a lot more different now, so it's more within the investment themselves. So people will be in a regulated pension arrangement, a SIP or a SAS are still used, but SIPs equally as much. But the investments themselves, because with a SIP, you can invest in.
Take all your personal items with you when you leave the train.
Great. Henry's getting off the train. So within this SAS or SIP, you can have whatever investments you like, and so this is where you get unregulated investments. Again, the same old, promising big returns, but there will be large fees. And you'll have seen, I mean, there's been panorama programs about this. People being hoodwinked into investing into resort groups on Cape Verde and things like this, properties, storage pods you may have heard about as well, all these sorts of things. But eventually, the charges and the scammer just gradually whittle away at those funds, and they're left with nothing. And again, these are a slow burn, so people don't always know they're being scammed until it's too late. And we'll come onto a slide in a second about the size of scams. But one of the issues is it's almost guaranteed there are people out there who have been scammed and they have no idea. They think everything's fantastic. They've invested in some brilliant opportunity that's going to revolutionize their retirement and make everything fantastic, but they are now being scammed right now, and when they need the money, it won't be there. And scams have moved on even more. It gets even worse. So we're now seeing people that have been scammed being approached by scammers again, saying, we are now working for a claims management firm, we can get your money back. And it effectively is the same people. Even on some occasions, the same people. The original scammer has come back again to contact these people under a different guise, saying we can now recover some of these funds, and they're getting scammed again, all over again. Actually, there's a report at the end I'll talk about as well from the Money Advice Service, which talks about super targets and super victims, which is being recognised by them, and we'll come on to that. Also, we're seeing GDPR, so SDAR as a subject data access request, and people are fishing for information about that. We're getting that in our business. People are trying to find out information about the size of people's pension pots, what sort of assets they have, to see whether they are someone who could be worthwhile scamming. So that's how scams have developed. Now, I've got a slide here on the consequences of scams, which is fairly obvious. I don't want to teach you guys to suck eggs. I know you're all professionals and involved with pensions, but there's some quite powerful quotes there. These quotes are all from the Working Pensions Committee's report on scams. And it's quite stark. Some of these, actually, I've got a link to the document later on as well, so you can read it for yourself. But some of these testimonials from people that have been victims of scams are really quite moving to read. People who have been lost everything, and they're embarrassed and they feel ashamed and they don't trust other financial institutions anymore. And they even felt when they were trying to report it to actual fraud that they weren't listened to or understood or sympathized with. So there's a massive issue, obviously. And also, I mean, the orange box is talking about, a lot of people do get quite sniffy with people that are victims of scams. I mean, I've heard people say, no, they were greedy, they should have known. But ignorance is a massive part of it. That person saying, effectively, I was snared by these scammers, and it was ignorance that I was a victim of. I wasn't greedy. I just didn't know that what they are offering was so ridiculous or anything else. I just didn't understand what was going on, and I've lost everything. So, yeah, no, obviously massive issues on the individuals. We've also can see issues for trustees if they go ahead with making a transfer to a scam arrangement. So trustees could be, if you stop the transfer, this is what we had really before the statutory right change, which I'll come on to in a second, but this is still the case in many ways. But if trustees could be stuck in a situation where they know it's going to a scam, and if they try to stop it, they could be breaking the law, and so that means the regulator would come in with some fines on them. The ombudsman might get involved, and there's additional costs on recalculating transfer values. So there are implications for trustees if they decide to stop it. If they make it to a scam, then it's an unauthorized payment potentially, and there could be additional charges with that, especially if it goes overseas. The ombudsman may uphold the complaint, which might have issues for the scheme, and also the statutory discharge might be compromised, and so the actual benefits may remain. And there's also the reputational damage of having made a payment to a scam arrangement. So not only the implications for members, but for the trustees as well, and how they react to this. So how big? Oh, I didn't realize I just had transitions. How big is the scam problem? Well, I'd say it's virtually impossible to estimate. There are a broad range of estimates here, as you can see. So People's Pension estimated it could be as large as £14 billion. That feels a bit toppy to me. I think their methodology here was basically doing a survey of adults who have been scammed and then extrapolating across the size of pension pots in the UK. So that feels slightly large. PSIG have it around 10 billion, which still sounds massive. We know the FCA has got a single case of just shy of 1 billion. So we know there are big numbers flying around, and we know that in addition, that only a minority of cases are still being reported. And I'll come on to a little bit about the reporting later, but we know Margaret Snowden was quoted in the press last week talking about how reporting scams is still a massive challenge. It's not easy, it's not straightforward, and not very efficient either. So we are confident that not all scams are being reported appropriately. Regulators tried over the years to address this. So there's some examples here of things. If you've been around in pensions for a while, you might remember the shark. We used to stick that in transfer values back in the early 2000s, but they had the scorpion, and then more recently we had the jet ski guy, who I still see dotted around. So these are some of the initiatives they've used with varying degrees of success, but they have tried. I mean, I tip my hat to regulator. They have tried with various degrees of success. So what has come in, though, which has made a difference, are the new laws to change the way we deal with scams. So the first big change came in 2015, thanks to pensions freedom. But the law came in that if you had a transfer value and you were transferring from a defined benefit scheme and it was more than £30,000, then you had to get independent financial advice, and that's still the case now. So that's a great help. I mean, it's not to say that a transfer value of £29,000 still isn't a lot of money to some people, but it does help that there is a de minimis level that above which you need to get financial advice, which should protect some people if that advisor is a good quality advisor. That's a big if. However, if the member wanted to go ahead, they still could. So you may have heard of the Hughes versus Royal London case. This was a case where Royal London had around 170 odd, 200 people wanted to transfer out, and they said, no, you're going to a scam arrangement. We are not going to do it. And this was conflicted with the statutory right to transfer that the members had. So they went to the Ombudsman, and I think ended up going to the High Court, and the High Court said, trustees, it's not your job to second guess what people are doing with their money. They have the statutory right. Just because you think it may not be a good option, you have to do it. So the trustees were powerless to stop the transfer. And so thanks to this test case with Mrs. Hughes, the whole 170 odd people transferred out. And we have since learned that that was to a scam arrangement. So Royal London were doing the right thing, and they were stopped by the law effectively. So that brought to a head the issue around the statutory right to transfer. But in the intervening period, we had the ban on cold calling, which came in on the 9th of January 2019, which banned unsolicited calls, texts, and emails to people about pensions, and we've got a slide later on, which I think has in general been a success. It is questioned because if you're a scammer, you're a criminal anyway. So whether this would actually stop you from actually contacting people. And while I'm not saying EB associates were scammers, they are one of the few examples of people that have been prosecuted under this law. They were prosecuted £140,000 for making 107,000 illegal calls in December 21. But it's a not often used law, but it is out there, and it does. I think the success of the ban on cold calling is that it created a situation where you can just say to people, if someone has called you out of the blue, hang up. It is almost certainly not going to be in your best interest. It's against the law in the first place. So whoever this person isn't looking out for you. They're only looking out for themselves. So it does make it easier for trustees to say, if someone calls you out of the blue, hang up. I do tend to keep them on the phone for a bit longer because they're talking to me. They're not talking to a victim. And then in November 21, we had the largest change, and this came in very quickly, which was a bit of an issue initially for sort of getting up to speed with it. But effectively what it does is it changed the definition of a statutory transfer. So this the bottom line of this, it would allow trustees to say, we think this is going to a scam, and if it is a scam, then we can say no to the transfer. So the existing conditions for a statutory transfer still existed. So the member has to have benefits in the scheme. They've not taken any benefits out of the scheme, and they're no longer accruing rights. Those three things exist, then you have a statutory right. And then there are new broad conditions brought in around if it's going to an authorised scheme. So the government created a whitelist of schemes it could go to. And then condition 2 was around what type of transfer it's going to. And we'll go through those just very briefly. So condition 1 was what type of scheme it's going to. So if it's going to a public sector scheme, a master trust, or an authorised CDC scheme, then that's fine. It was notable and surprising in a way that FCA regulated pensions weren't on that whitelist. So if it's going to basically any GPP or SIP or personal pension, then they're not on that list, but all the authorised master trusts and the CDC schemes are on there. So that does deal with quite a lot of the transfers, so that's fine. Condition 2 is around employment and residency. So if it's going to an occupational pension scheme, you have to be able to prove that the person actually working there. And on the slide, you've got some of the things that you need to be able to prove. And also, if you're going overseas, you have to prove that you live in that country where the transfer is going to. They also changed the law so that it used to be that if you're in the EU, you could transfer to Malta or Guernsey, and these were hotbeds for scams. Now you have to be resident in the country where that pension scheme is, so you can't just live in the EU and take a transfer to any other arrangements. That's helped address some of those overseas scams. And then we've got the amber flags. So these are sort of low risk areas where this sort of hint that perhaps it's a scam isn't saying it definitely is a scam, but it's one of the areas where we should be concerned. So the first two conditions, first two flags are around the employment link. So either the member can't or won't or hasn't shown that there's an employment link. There's high risk or unregulated investments in the pension. The charges are unclear. The scheme investment is a bit unorthodox. There are overseas investments, and we'll come on to that in a bit because that's a controversial one. Or there's been a sharp or unusual rise in transfers involving a particular scheme. So if we spot these in our due diligence, then we have to make that member go and have a money helper appointment. They have to book that themselves, or we can help them book it. And they have to have that conversation before the transfer can continue. And then the red flags are the big, if that happens, then no, we can stop this transfer. So the member is just failing to provide information, that's a red flag. They've not had their money helper appointment. Regulated activities without regulatory authority, so there's an unregulated advisor involved. Unsolicited contact, so if there's been a cold call to begin this, then that's a red flag. Incentivizations, so sometimes the scammers might say, oh, we'll give you a few £1,000 if you come across. That's seen as an incentive, but it's also controversial, and I'll come onto that in a second. And the member's under pressure, so one of the key signs is, sort of buy now or you'll lose it type pressure from the scammer. These are all red flags, and if they're in existence, then we can stop the transfer, and that's just very helpful. So what can trustees actually do in real life? So we've got a bit of a life cycle of what happens when a member is trying to transfer. So first we'll look at the receiving scheme. As we say, if it's on that whitelist, and that's fine. If it's not, I would say, I know this is being recorded, but I'm not talking for Broadstone necessarily, but I would say that we take quite a pragmatic view on the way this works. If it's going to a FCA regulated pension scheme, if it's going to AJ Bell or Hargreaves Lansdowne or Pension B or someone who we know is absolutely fine, we will treat that accordingly and not necessarily go full on and thinking just because it's not on the whitelist that we should treat it as a scam. But if it's a scheme we're not known about, or it's a new arrangement or a dormant employer, all these kind of things, that's the point we would do the due diligence and working out what the receiving scheme is like. The advisor, again, so we'll check out the regulated list for the advisor. If there's been an unregulated introducer, as we know, that's a red flag. We would spot that. Transfer history, there's evidence that some people will hop between arrangements. So they might go out from a DB scheme into a personal pension and then into a scam. So again, as administrators, we have to be alert to members. What's happening to those funds? Where are they going next? Is this just a hopping? And some of that is a bit of detective work. We do talk to the members. We have questionnaires we send out. And so we do have to be alert to what's happening and try to find out what's going on behind the scenes with the individual. Poisoning the well is quite an interesting one, just to skip onto that, because in our conversations, we sometimes see members are being coached by the scammers on what to say, or we'll have phrases like, oh, they told me that you would ask me these questions. They said you would be like this kind of stuff. And we have to be alert to that. So there's a lot of soft skills around doing this due diligence to be able to spot how people are reacting to us, asking them for information. If they're not happy, that's often a red flag for us, not necessarily a red flag for the legislation, but it's a red flag for us that something isn't right with this transfer, and we can try and dig around and find out what's going on. And vulnerable members, we're very alert to this because, vulnerable members are probably more likely to be victims if they have low literacy or they're mental health problems or have low income or high debt, these kind of things. If we can find out these things about people, and it's sometimes not easy to, because you don't also want to pry, but again, we have to be alert to the way people are talking to us. And if they're pressuring us, we get people chasing us saying, where's my transfer value? You need the money. Well, if you're getting this kind of stuff, that for us internally is a red flag, and we will start to do more digging around what's going on, why is this person, and is this potentially a scam? Because they are probably more likely to be scams if they are so desperate, because the scammers are more likely to get the hooks into those types of people. Other common issues we see, the free pension review is still an issue. So people clicking on the link on the website saying, click here for a free pension review. Claims of tax efficiency and pressure sales. I'm just skipping through the slides a little bit because I don't want to preach the converted too much. But these are key warning signs that we're seeing. This is, again, is a little chart of how we deal with it. So, we term the level of risk, contact the member, risk assessment, but then calling the member, we do find actually speaking to the person far more efficient than sending them emails, because if we actually get to talk to them, they haven't got the scammer necessarily in their ear, telling them what to say, coaching them how to answer questions. We can find out a lot more from a telephone call than 3 weeks, 4 weeks of email exchanges. So that is a key part. If we're concerned, we will pick up the phone and actually talk to people, and that works a lot of the time to read out what's going on. And what can trustees do? I mean, as I say, there's quite a few resources in these slides. So regularly remind members of the risks. So we're signposting people to other resources, FCA resources, TPR resources. So on summary funding statements, we included newsletters, member forums. It's constantly, I was with the trustee board yesterday and we were talking about this. We just signed off our accounts, and so it's time to start writing the newsletter. And they always include something on scams, and we're looking to include something different each time, trying to make it more engaging for people to read. If you say the same thing each time, people just get immune to it. So again, trying to think of new ways. And we've got the pension scam aware video that I know Ian's on the call that he was involved with creating, which is great. So that's we use that actually in Broadstone with our members. We make sure they watch that, which is a great way of just another way of giving people the information. One area that hasn't picked up as much as I thought it would, if you'd asked me sort of 5-6 years ago, where would we be today? I'd have said I would suggest that more trustees would be signposting to financial advisors, because it is incredibly difficult to find a good financial advisor. If you just Google financial advisor, who knows if that person is a good one or a bad one or a scammer or whatever. And I am surprised, also given the regulator, I've got the image at the front page there. The regulator and the FCA have provided a guide for employers and trustees, which does explain how you could appoint an advisor attached to your scheme, who could learn about your scheme, all these kind of things, and actually be able to give advice to people rather than letting them go on the high seas of trying to find an advisor on the web, which I think is dangerous. Members ask me, how do you find an advisor? I'll tell you what I tend to do is give them the Paul Lewis article, which talks about what different types of advisors are. But other than that, I feel very uneasy suggesting anybody, because I don't know, I've not done the due diligence, but I do think that trustees do have the ability to do this, and I'm surprised it doesn't happen more often. We had the pledge, so that got a mixed response. You've got some of the numbers there. It's not fantastic if you think how many pension schemes there are in the UK, probably 40,000 pension schemes. So I think the issue with the pledge is that it's asking trustees to do something when really it's the administrators. The administrators do all the work. So when I've talked to my trustees about this, so you can sign this pledge, it'll look good. It's another reason to talk about scams. It says you're doing all the right things. And they just look at me and say, but you're doing it. You sign the pledge. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll tell you can sign the pledge because we're doing it. We have this kind of weird iterative conversation, when really it should be, in my view, it should be administrators. I mean, so last week TPR saying they're going to talk to administrators more, which I think is great. If they come and talk to us, we'll be saying, well, why don't you ask us what we do about scams, and then say Broadstone have signed up to the administrators scam pledge, because we're the ones doing the work. We're the ones, and you have the toolkit as well, which suggests members are phoning up trustees and trustees are phoning up members. That doesn't happen very often. I mean, that is minority of cases that the trustees ever actually get involved with a case. It's your administrators that are doing the work. So I think the pledge, while I like it, I think it's been misdirected. I've called it the Project Bloom fiasco because I like to think I'm a fairly well-informed pensions person, and I never knew what Project Bloom was. Calling it Project Bloom was always a stupid idea, I thought. So Project Bloom was this sort of organisation of action fraud, and I don't know who else really. It just seemed ridiculous that it should be held on a secretive basis, that if you weren't in the group, if you weren't in the gang, you didn't know about it. They should have been shouting about Project Bloom from the rooftops, and they have now changed it and called it the Pension Scams Action Group. But they need to be doing a lot more. They need to be more visible for people in the industry. I would talk to colleagues, say, have you heard of Project Bloom? And they'd just be completely unaware of what it is. And I think that was a mistake. Issues and concerns. So I hinted at a few issues with the statutory rules. So, I mean, the regulations are not good. They don't really address the problem properly. So we have this problem with overseas investments, that's missing in there, where people are seeing this as being, if there's a global equity fund, then that's an overseas investment. And it clearly isn't, but the rules say it does. So we have this conflict here, and also around the incentives, which is a red flag, which is a big issue. If you give 50 quid or a voucher or something, that is an incentive as well. TPR guidance is try to address that by fudging it a little bit. But if your lawyers say, no, the law says X, you can't do this transfer without signposting to Money Helper, or you have to stop this transfer if there's incentive, then there's very little anyone can do about that. I mean, again, as I say, as administrators, we are relatively pragmatic when it comes to these, and we don't want to stand in the way of members doing what they want to do with their money just because the law doesn't quite work. But if the lawyers have told the trustees, then that generally is the end of it. We aren't able to get around that. So the statutory rules do have issues. There's been a review earlier on this year, and DWP have acknowledged this is an issue and have pledged to change it, but no timetable as of yet to when to change it. And the online safety bill is on the way as well. I'm hoping this does actually bring some good, especially around adverts on things like Google adverts and things like that. But it will be the pace. The big problem will be, yes, we'll spot an advert. We know it's a scammer. We know it's a front for a scam arrangement. We'll report it. And 3 months later, it's still there. That'll be the problem. So it's just whether we'll actually be able to have a process to be able to report problems and then get them removed quickly. I've noted the scams module on the toolkit, which I think is poor. I mean, it was not that old, but it doesn't really reflect real life, and I think that needs to be updated. I know the regulator talks about updating the toolkit frequently, but that does need to be updated. I just don't think it's right. The reporting concerns, which I mentioned earlier, that Margaret has been talking about. So yeah, we all believe scams are being underreported. Will basically make it easier for us to report, and you'll know more about what's going on and be able to do things about it. So there's lots of people we have to report to. You don't always get a response. You don't always feel like you're actually talking to a real human being that cares. And that's a real problem, I think, with people engaging with the reporting process. And I'm also mindful of what's happening. The more complication, the more change that comes, it's more areas where scammers will see space. So, DC pot consolidation. When I was, going through the response or the call for evidence over the summer, I did feel some of those areas in there for members to be confused, and then come with confusion will come a scammer coming along saying, "Oh, consolidate here with me," these kind of things. I think that there's some risks in there. Pensions dashboards, again, members having all their pots in one place, scammers can easily then go, "Give us a screenshot of all your pots, brilliant, we can consolidate them with me." DC decumulation, how trustees are going to be able to get people through that, transferring into new arrangements to get into drawdown or whatever. And the rise in the MPA, going from 50 to 57, again, is another area where people will be told, or transfer now to protect your age 55, these kind of things. Anything like that just is space for scammers, and we need to be alert to it when communicating with members. Getting near the end of the slides, so don't worry. So we had a MAPS report as well, which is very interesting reading. I do recommend it. Again, they're worried about the extent that scams are being reported. And so there's some interesting insights in there around victims. Some of their experience of victims, that they are highly educated and overconfident individuals, not necessarily the people you might imagine, but often suffering personal financial stress. There's a risk of becoming the super target. So these people who are being retargeted again and again by scammers, perhaps they've been scammed in a different way. There's so many. I'll put my hand up. I got done by the Wilco scam the other day. My mother-in-law sent me a link saying, "Oh, you can, Dave, you're in the market for an air fryer. They're selling them for £5 on Wilco." And I tried to buy an air fryer for £5, and I got scammed. So now I'm probably on a list somewhere that I'm an easily scammed person. So you can be retargeted by these people. Yeah, so I think that's a really great report. I think that's well worth reading and learning from. I've got a slight hint at some good news. I think the cold calling ban has been a success. So the FCA Financial Live survey was talking about some areas of success where people aren't being approached as much as they used to be between 2017.
Dave, sorry, you've muted yourself.
I didn't touch anything, did I? Don't think I touched anything. Oh well, I don't know how much you missed, but that's fine. Right, I'm going to stop talking.
There is a question from Martin. Martin, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I'll stop.
Oh,
sharing.
right, okay. Well, it was, thank you very much. I mean, fantastic slide deck. You said at the start you were happy sharing it. Are you okay with us sharing it on to others in our organisations and contacts and things? I mean, with due credit, of course.
Well, it's got Broadstone written all over it, so yeah, that's fine. Yeah, no, that's fine. Absolutely.
Thank you. And I did also
on the sharing of slides, Martin. If you go on my blog, the slides will be posted there. But if you know email addresses, you can get them directly sent to you by David. So up to you. But the fallback position is go on my blog, and I will put the slides up there.
That's great, thanks. And I put a link up to the Money Helper Retirement Advisor Directory, which I think it would be fair to say is more complete than the unbiased list. I believe you have to pay to be listed on unbiased.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I don't I don't signpost unbiased anymore because of that. So yeah, we do tend to use that one now. Yeah. So, Phil, Henry, I know you're on the train. So I can point to.
Yeah.
I think Phil's first. He's got a number
Okay.
next to him, so that's easy. So yeah.
David, that was absolutely brilliant. Really fluid overview. Really stressing the same point that you've made. This would be solved if people were signposted to a vetted IFA. Yeah, that's really all that needs to be done. And we at Guide have actually, the reason is the trustees don't want to do all the due diligence and the governance. So at Guide, we solved that problem by doing it for them. So we've got a panel of IFAs vetted, okay, small number, member chooses. All the trustee has to do is signpost it. We've got 25 schemes so far. There's still, as you say, there's probably 70% of schemes are doing nothing other than doing like unbiased. And I spoke to a trustee only this week who said, do you want to just put this in front of the trustee board? And said, no, we got GMP, single code. And I just thought, just like, what? This is the simplest thing to sort out. So sorry, that's me getting on my pedestal. But I did actually ask the question. It was more like, what is stopping people doing something? Yeah, because at the moment the regulation tips towards after the horse has bolted, which just pisses members off. Yeah. So I'm sorry I've asked the question, but I've also given the answer as well. So I'll shut up.
Yeah, no, I don't know whether there's a bit. I don't know what kind of, other than we haven't got time. What I'd be interested to know what people say against doing it. You know, there's nervousness that how do I know that this advisor isn't a scammer or isn't rubbish or isn't like the British Steel situation? You know, they might be regulated, but that's not necessarily good enough. You know, it's not a badge that it doesn't seem to mean very much, the FCA regulating you.
It'll be interesting to hear from others on this webinar, but that example I gave is typical. It's trustees just not sticking it on the agenda and doing something because they think just like, oh well, the scam flags are in there. Yeah, deal with it after the event.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the scam flag's all great, but the scammer's already got their hooks into the person, so you know they can coach you through. They can coach them through it. You know, really, they know the flags as well as anybody else. You can get around it. It isn't a failsafe.
I'm sorry, it's so funny watching Henry Shaw walk in.
Alexander, did you want to ask your question? I think you're next.
If I can just say, I'm not planning this. I have to get to a meeting at 11:30, and I was given no warning whatsoever that I was supposed to be hosting this meeting. So if you guys do want to take on the rest of the meeting, that's fine. I'll try and cut it at the end. I apologise.
No, that's fine, Henry. That's fine. You just get from A to B. Alexander, you're on mute.
Classic. Thank you. Just a question around the introduction of the consumer duty by the FCA. I was interested to know, get views from yourself, David, and everyone else here. Is there anything that trustees, administrators can glean from the introduction of the consumer duty? Does it provide any new tools aside from that could be used in tandem with the various conditions to help protect members and protect them from scams?
I'll be honest, I don't know because I've not had I very helpfully had some lawyers telling me it doesn't apply to you, so it's fine. So I've not spent a lot of time looking at it. The areas I have noticed around sort of vulnerable members, I think that's an area, but I think speaking personally from Broadstone, we're pretty good at that already, but we probably could learn some more things. There's always things to learn.
Yeah.
I'll be interested in the views of others if they're closer to consumer duty
Just-
than I am.
Yeah, just as an observation, I think there's certainly the stuff around vulnerable members, and I think the other thing is in relation to scenarios, particularly around overseas members, where there might be more than one advisor involved, and the responsibilities of the UK advisor in that context is potentially quite helpful. And with my organisation, we have quite a large overseas population, overseas member population, so that could be quite useful. But just to flag that one.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone knows about the consumer duty more who wants to come in. I'll let you jump in front of Ian if you put your hand up. Unless Ian knows about consumer duty, he might do actually.
Well, there is a general catch-all within consumer duty about communicating with people in a way that they understand.
Yeah.
So I think there's a general point there that you're meant to test your communications to make sure they're having the impact that you're expecting them to have. So I guess there is some relevance there. The point I was going to be, it was just a question in my own interest, was about younger people in particular and crypto, because crypto has been used as a very effective mechanism for scamming people out with pensions. And I just wondered, is that something that is also happening to people within, younger people in particular within pensions? Is
It's
that
not something I'm
you
seeing. I think I think the reason why I'm not seeing it in my world is because I'm in DB world where all the pension schemes are closed. We don't get many young people in DB schemes in my world. So yeah, so I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing that, but I'm not. That's not to say I'm sure it isn't happening. I'm sure it is happening. I haven't seen it mentioned in the maps. I didn't see it mentioned in the maps report.
No, I've never heard it mentioned, but I know it's been a real problem for younger people, particularly, as I say, outside their pension. But with all the younger people in auto enrolment, I would wonder if it's a lever that is pulled not just to get their non-pension assets, but also to get their pension assets as well.
Yeah,
I mean, I think the cold calling thing will have impacted on that. Also, crypto has gone out of fashion recently because of its a dreadful performance. So that's going to suppress that. But it just kind of concerns me knowing how many people are getting scammed on crypto with relatively modest amounts of money. That if young people, you spend all that time trying to encourage them to get into pensions and value the pension, and then it's kind of distressing thought. So I just wondered if you'd had any experience of it.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, Bitcoin it sort of seems to be flatlining a bit at the moment, but it's the exchanges collapsing. That'd be the reason why Bitcoin's probably a bit less popular. But
just on this crypto thing, if anyone has a message from me on Instagram or anywhere else saying that I'm recommending crypto, please understand this is an impersonation fraud. The problem is it's virtually impossible to get Meta to take them down. So there's hundreds of them. I know Martin Lewis has reported out over 1,000 instances of him being impersonated. Me, it's only 3. But I mean, any of us could be. And there's nothing much we can do about it. So there's massive reputational damage as well for people who are prominent in pensions advice.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Is there anything else from you?
I'm just working out how to unraise my hand, actually.
Okay.
You do this.
Richard, it's your turn.
Right, thanks. Right, it's just interesting as to how many scams and things there are. The only, for the contract with customers, the only recent case I've had of actually somebody saying there's a scam is actually it was the IFA who was scammed. The IFA hadn't done all the checks and things and was ending up using an unregulated investment. The customer themselves had no contact at all with the scammer, basically. It'd be interesting to understand just how much, should we say, due diligence things that IFAs are actually doing there to protect their customers.
So they were selling a product they didn't realise was a scam, effectively.
That's it.
Blimey. That's scary, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I have no experience of that, but that sounds scary. Any other? Does anyone want to have a comment on that? If they've got experience of that? No. Yeah, no, that's one to look out for, definitely, Richard. Thank you. Chris.
Thanks, David. Great presentation. my first question might be to Ian on how I unraised my hand, but my real question to you is,
you've done it.
That was automatic.
I think Ian's
Fantastic.
doing something in the background. He's playing games.
Yeah, I've got manipulation. Yeah.
I could hear him giggling as he was doing it. Sorry, Chris.
So my question was about we've had the advert campaigns from the regulator and things, and my perception is that the people in the industry see them, and kind of everyone else, all my friends, all my family who are if I mention that, generally not at parties, but if they're talking about pensions to me, they just haven't seen it. They haven't seen any of it, and it's a fairly common issue in all. I think the pensions sort of, when they've tried to sort of advertise anything to the public more generally. Is it just sort of a question for you? Is there a sort of what works? What kind of targets the right people at the right time and gets the attention kind of in that way? It's probably really unfair.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I think that's the thing. I've seen that advert loads, but because the algorithm probably knows that I look at pensions things all the time, so I would sit and I watch a YouTube video and I'll see that jet skiers skimming around. Yeah, so I think the DWP just doesn't have. It's not pointless, but it's almost pointless, because they'll have a drop in the ocean compared to the advertising budget of a film or a McDonald's or whatever. So it's never going to compete, and it's never going to get the bandwidth ever. I think it's trustees. I think for my world, it's trustees. You are trusted by your members. And if you're not trusted, then that's a problem. But you should be trusted by your members, and then you have to communicate to them and warn them again and again and again and again and again. And it's engaging with those deferred members. People forget as well that deferred members are sort of the forgotten person, really, in a scheme. Actives all over them, pensioners all over them. You're sending them payslips every month, all this kind of stuff. Deferred members, you don't even know where they are half the time. So it's finding your deferred members, getting them a regular newsletter, including something about scams. And then that's just the start. So then it's every year you remind them, don't, give them the warning signs. And actually, one of the slides I've got, it might have been the next couple on, actually it was the next one, anti-scam top tips, which you'll see, which is from the Money and Pensions report. And I think they had it, their sort of steer to it was more how our advisors and how we can do better at communicating and supporting people. But there are lessons in here that trustees can take, sort of improving skills. So focusing on helping individuals identify scams, talking to them in a way that you're communicating. Let's come back to this consumer duty thing. Communicating with people in a way that they're going to accept that information and then understand that information. And if 7 paragraphs in Times New Roman font 11 isn't going to engage them, then think of something else. Use a video. I can see Ian's put his hand up immediately. Actually, you put up before I said video, but yeah, use a video, use something else, use this. Have member forums. So many I've only got 2 schemes to do member forums. I don't have that many schemes anymore, but have physical conversations, do videos with them, and let them see things in different ways. And also, it's talking about the language people are using as well. So try not to use victims, because no one imagines themselves to be a victim. I'm too clever for this. I'll spot it a mile off, kind of thing. And try to have case studies that make it come to life, that it's easy. Anyone, it could happen to you, it could happen to your mum, it could happen to anybody, sort of thing. So when you get the slides, I've only pulled out 5 or 6 top tips, but there's probably more in there in that report from the Money and Pension Service. So I think it's trusted people telling them stuff. I think that's the key.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
With Stephen and Henry not in communication, I've got access to the lobby and stuff, so I can let people in and things. Also, where there's a couple of questions in the chat, but do you want to go first, Ian, and I can shout out the questions in the chat after? Sure,
Chris. Yeah, I was just thinking about what David was saying about communicating in different ways, and you mentioned we've got a free video, pensionscamaware.co.uk, which is in the slides. And we used a behavioural finance expert to help us review that script, as well as speaking to scam victims who we met through the Transparency Task Force. So that's kind of how we curated the script. And it's all about slowing down, and then it's signposting and encouraging people to bookmark Scam Smart. And the idea is to give the member like the first mover advantage. So when some bullshit starts being fed to them from a scammer, it kind of flags up that they've already heard about this kind of thing. that kind of familiarity. Going back to the point about consumer duty, we also put, if you watch it, there's a recap exercise. So as well as consuming the information in a video through the visuals and the script, you know, the avatar speaking to you, you then have to do a drag and drop exercise. So you literally have to pick out, like, you should bookmark the FCAs, and then you have to go and look for the word scam smart. And so you're learning in a different way. And these are the ways that you can actually communicate effectively, people. So you say it and you say it again, and you do it in creative ways. And for some reason, with all our testing and now in use, drag and drop exercises are really, really popular with members because they like interactivity. So anyway, just I thought I'd make that point when we're talking about different ways of communicating.
No, thank you. That's excellent. Thanks, Ian.
Welcome.
Peter Cameron Brown had a question. Do you want to say that, Peter? Or? Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, his microphone not working, it says.
Oh, cool. So his question was that he had a friend who found it impossible to get an IFA. They wanted an IFA but found it impossible to on an existing drawdown SIP. Most IFAs approached did not have the relevant permissions, and those he did find could not help because the funds would not be sum after the transfer. He wanted to use an IFA because an investigation he discovered that the Section 32 appeared to have been maladministered. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, I've sympathies, because when we were thinking about DB permissions and scams and things like this and the risk on advisors a few years ago, and an advisor friend of mine was saying that the number of advisors is just going to dwindle. The more the FCA goes after the advisors for seemingly giving, you know, what they thought was good advice. I mean, there's also obviously bad players, but some people do think they did a good job, and the FCA is still fining them. You know, I've heard of cases where the FCA are fining advisors who advise people not to transfer, and they should have advised them to transfer. So it's even so this whole DB advice space is such a bad area for advisors. And the suggestion was that anyone left doing it, I don't know if Philip's on the call, but anyone left doing it is probably going to be a scammer. That was our view at the time, you know, because we just thought, well, who wants to do this job? You know, who actually wants to give DB transfer advice? Because you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So it's just a risk for your future business hanging over you, you know, your PI insurance the whole time, your PI cover going up through the roof, all that sort of stuff. So I am not surprised someone is struggling to find an IFA willing to take it on, either because the numbers are too small and it's just not worth the risk, not worth the bother, or they just don't have the permissions anymore. And other than talking to Phil and seeing what advisors he has on his panel that are good, are still doing it, you know, because obviously it's going to consolidate in a fewer number of advisors doing it, because the numbers, and again, the numbers aren't that massive at the moment either, because transfer values have dropped dramatically. If someone asked for a transfer value in January 22, it could have been, you know, £1 million. They asked for one in September 23, it'll be £500,000 probably. You know, it's massive, dramatic change, which has made people a lot less interested in transfers as well. So yeah, the market is a very strange place, and I'm not surprised people struggle. Yeah. So sorry, I don't have any magic wand other than speak to Philip Guide. Ian, did you want to come in again?
Yeah, I'm just saying we've noticed from our customer base of advisors who use Money Alive for DB triage that there are some very, very large companies very active in this market still. So people like Aviva, for example, Evelyn and Partners will give advice. So yes, PI has squeezed out a lot of advisors, but there are some large players who are still, you know, got the very, very, very good systems in place, and they're confident about the advice they're delivering. So it still is available.
Yeah.
Thanks all. And I think David had a question. Did you want to say your question, David? Or a comment?
Sorry, yeah, it was more a comment really, just around the timescales and organisation and lack of staffing with some of the providers, which is probably well known to anyone that's dealing with it. But we've seen issues whereby we've had requests for funds to be sent back 6 months later because the companies forgot to do due diligence checks. We have delays of up to 30 days for the teams to do the checks, and when you're chasing for an update, you get no sort of guidance as to how long it's going to take, to the point where they just really give a "we don't really care" attitude towards it, which then feeds back to the members who are then confused about what's happening with their transfer. And the longer it goes on, the more the member kind of thinks, well, is it right to be transferring when they've already made an active choice to transfer? So I think there's one or two providers that everyone probably knows about. You really need to up their game a bit.
Is this DC to DC or DB to DC or both?
DC to DC.
Yeah, DC to DC. Yeah, like I say, the due diligence is a little bit different there, because you're not giving up those guarantees and those kind of things. But yes, no, sympathies with the DC to DC. DB to DC it does take a long time, and we do get members who are doing a bona fide transfer do get a bit frustrated with us, and that's we are just doing our best to make sure people might see it as a tick box exercise, and that's fine, but we do need to go through this process, and so they are taking longer, that's for sure. DC to DC, I still that shouldn't be happening in my view. Also, just as a quick aside, I don't know if you guys are aware, this isn't quite scams actually, but it's more about what David got me thinking about, experiences with other advisors around transfer values being paid incorrectly and then being claimed back. I don't know if you saw, there was a couple of articles in CityWire a couple of weeks ago, which were quite interesting reading if you want to dig those out, or where providers have been calculating the transfer values wrong and are now having to go back to members and say, we overpaid you £40,000 transfer value 2 years ago, give us the money back type situations, which isn't great. But yeah, it just got me thinking about the process and how it's not working in some places. So that's worth looking into. I don't want to muckrake. Sorry, that wasn't very professional. But it's notable. It's notable in we're aware of it as a provider. Sorry, Chris. I don't know if you're taking over the chairing now.
Yeah, no, cool. Mark's just added a comment about saying there's been a 400% increase in DC to DC transfers just from trust-based schemes since 2019 to 22, which, seems a lot, doesn't it? But
it does seem a lot. I suppose if you can only imagine it going faster. I don't know whether people are just, trustees are now having to engage more with their DC arrangements, occupational DC arrangements, because of all the value for members requirements, those kind of things. Maybe they're just getting more engaged and making members take action. That's probably my submission of what's going on.
It may be the DB to DC is going completely the other way for the reasons you said earlier about the figures going down considerably.
Oh, yeah.
If you're trying to scam someone, then
the numbers have gone down so much. 2 years ago you might take a punt on it, but now people are much more willing to stick with their DB pension, as boring as it is, as secure as it is. Sorry, that's the sales tactic, isn't it? Oh, DB's boring, you can't do anything with it. All you're going to get is an income for life. Ugh, yawn. That's the.
I heard secure, David. I heard secure. Absolutely.
Cool. Mark.
I saw Henry had popped back on.
He did, and then he went away again.
If he had anything to add in there. Mark's comment. But you feel free to unmute and add your comment, Mark, or I can read it out. He was saying that they'd only had 50k of DB transfers, but 340k DC to DC. So sort of 7 times the amount, which, when the DB pots are likely to be considerably larger, shows that the actual numerical value of the transfers is likely to be substantially.
When dashboard comes along, that's going to speed up even more. You can only imagine it going one direction. More DC transfers. That's why I think the point Dave Henderson was making. The process needs to be better. And I know you've got Tom McPhail next week. He's always been banging the drum for, I don't know what he's talking about, but he's been banging the drum for better, faster DC transfers for years. So you can ask him about that next week, I think.
Well, we're nearly at time. Martin's got one final question, I think.
Yeah, just a very quick observation. I think a lot of people, members, don't understand DB. So when they see the transfer value go down, they're saying the trustees have lost my money. If they transferred when I wanted them to 6 months ago, when I first asked, I'd got that. Now they've lost it. So it's an unintended consequence of the safeguarding checks that it's been seen as a delaying tactic, and they're just trying to hold on to my money. So I do hope those regulations get reviewed promptly, because I think it is dragging down the whole industry, that it's increasing mistrust in pensions and pension providers generally.
Yeah, I agree. It's you know, we do tend to shoot ourselves in the foot and sort of make it look like we're doing things when we're not. You know, there's sort of that perception. And I was looking on Twitter yesterday, people talking about, you know, Wilco's, people going to the PPF, or, you know, or talking about state pension, and they just conflate things. Someone was talking about how there's 1.6 trillion of unfunded benefits or liabilities in the private sector. All this kind of nonsense that just flies around, and it flies around unaddressed or unprotected. Sorry, it's just John's comment about Henry made me laugh. So I shouldn't read comments when I'm trying to talk, but but yes, the distrust. It's the thing. It's a battle we're always fighting. Is, you know, people's misunderstanding of how the pension system works is a weakness and an opportunity for scammers. Yeah, Henry's lost.
I just read the comment too.
Thanks very much indeed to everybody on this call. I'm sorry it's been a bit disjointed from the hosting side. Thank you very much indeed, Chris, for coming on and helping out at the end. I'm being told, as we do, to pray for peace in the East. So if we can do that. As has been said before, Tom McPhail is up next week, which is great. And we'll look forward to that. The slides, as I say, and the blog will be available from David if you have his email. Do you want to give out your email, David?
Yeah, david.brooks@broadstone.co.uk, or PensionsDave on Twitter if you want to connect on there, or LinkedIn. I'm all over it. It's brilliant. Love it. I love pensions.
Good luck. Good luck attaching a slide share to Twitter, but you can do it. I'll put it on SlideShare and I'll put it on my blog. If you want to go on my blog, you can get it. And thanks most of all to Dave and to Simon and the team at Broadstone for putting together this excellent presentation and giving us such an interesting hour. So with that, I'll wave goodbye from a sunny or not so sunny city.
Thanks, Henry. Thanks, everyone. Really enjoyed that.
Thanks
See you again soon.
Cheers.